are ready to go. Hello, everyone. Today is the ACM Underclassmen meeting. Feel free to sign in with the links below in the description or use the QR code. And we'll go ahead and get started. First, we'll talk about some of our upcoming events. So this Wednesday, we are talking about Rust. Russell will be leading the workshop, and we'll be learning on why Rust is an up-and-coming language and what perks it has compared to other languages. So that's April 15th or Wednesday at 1 p.m. on the YouTube stream. Rowdy Creators this Friday, April 17th at 10 a.m. Their Discord link is in the Rowdy Creators channel. I believe there's also a link in the description below as well. So feel free to join their Discord to be more involved with their weekly meetings. ICPC is on Saturdays, and we'll be having another one on the 18th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it'll be just kind of a session to talk about just like data structures or algorithms. It's a good place to really hone your craft in terms of understanding data structures and algorithms. And then next week, which we're all really excited about, is ACM general elections. It'll be 1 p.m., but it'll be in a Zoom call. We'll share the meeting with everyone on the Slack channel, but we'll be doing our general elections. If you haven't applied and you want to be an officer, go ahead and apply. I believe there's the documents on what positions there are and also what each role does. And then as well as a Google form to know what positions you're interested in. This will help us gauge how, I guess, like the interest rate of each position and also like what position you're going to be running for. So go ahead and fill that out as soon as possible, and we'll try to get back to you in terms of what you need to do to prepare for your elections. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of the officers. Yeah, that's basically the gist of the general elections. So we also have our officer meetings. So in line with somewhat of the general elections, going to the officer meetings is kind of a good way to understand what we do at our meetings, how we kind of structure it out so that we can create the best value for all our members, and also learn about how you can give a different perspective to ACM in generals. So they'll be on Mondays at 3 p.m. So right after this meeting, and they've gone completely virtual. If you want to join, just feel free to message one of the officers. And without further ado, we'll be talking about React for web dev. So React is a framework. React is a framework that really highlights the use of just sole JavaScript instead of using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Of course, CSS will still be used, but basically it abstracts the part out of HTML. So it's now just JavaScript and CSS. Some of the prerequisites would be to really understand some basic HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. You will need Node.js and NPM or Yarn, but we'll be using NPM mainly for this. Or we'll be using the default package that's provided through their designated setup instructions, which will be NPM or Yarn, one of the two. So how you would go about setting up your first React project is by using create React app. It's a script that helps you get started for your React project. And the disclaimer is that you need Node and NPM to start this off. So you need to run npx create React app and then your app name. And then you want to change your directory into your app, and then you can start your project. So let's go ahead and try that out. It takes some time, so we'll see what it looks like. So here I have like one that's already created, but if you wanted to go about creating another one, you would just do and keep in mind this script takes a long time, so we won't actually be using this this new React project to run our actual code. But it's a good way to get started. So your starting file structure has your app name, all your node modules, so like all your dependencies, git ignore, so it already has like a basic git ignore, a readme, a package.json, and then a basic app in your source files. So why should I use create React app? It basically helps you install all of your dependencies to get started, and initializes your Git repository, creates React scripts for starting your server and testing, and it overall just makes your life easier. So we'll go ahead and look at the demo. So I don't actually want to finish this, so I'll just go back to the React demo. And basically what it'll look like is what I have on the right side. So it's just a screen that has the React logo, which is like an atom, and then all of the different, or it's just a basic app that holds that information. So if we want to look into the file structure, we'll see that it's exactly what was stated. And then our basic app starts with app.js. So you can see here that it starts with a basic app. And if you look at it, it looks very similar to how HTML looks, with having your divs, your header image. These are all very HTML-like scripts, or like HTML-like language. And class name, so we can see that we're already using like CSS properties, and so that's how it's showing class name and then whatever we want to showcase with it. So let's get back into really understanding React. So the basics of React starts with learning what JSX is. So JSX is the building blocks to all of your code. So I like to think of JSX as HTML, but with extra properties. So as you can see here, we have a button element. And so that's the JSX element. But there's a lot more you can do with it. So you can pass props to all your elements. And it's basically a class name. So that's like all of the CSS classes that I want to use. And here I use an onClick. Um, so onClick just means, is just like a property that can be used by the button. And all it'll do is just say hi in the browser. Um, but these are things passed to the button JSX element. And then it showcases the value underneath. So, and then as I stated earlier, class name applies your CSS, which has the class selector of square. And we'll go ahead and add that to our basic React. So I'm going to go ahead and remove everything on the page. I'll just keep the background. That's fine with me. And we want a button here to be so so the cool thing about React is that it'll reload for you once you save your files. So you don't have to worry about redeploying it and starting it over again. So it has that same live server aspect. So if I do value here, that just means I need to have a variable value. So we'll just have 10 in here for now. And then we want to have the class name of square. So I'll go ahead and add some CSS in. Square. And I want my height to be 10 pmin and my width to be 10 pmin. Okay. So, and we want our font size to be 1. Okay, so now we have our basic square. And as you can see here, we have an HTML-like button added onto the page. And we also had an onClick prop, which just means that we'll just add it in here and we can see what it does. So now if I click the button, it'll say hi. So let's move on. So the reason React has become so popular is because of the prominence of components. So components are basically things that are reusable. And most of the JavaScript frameworks have been introduced with this sort of ideology where everything is now component based. You think of all of the different frameworks. They have their own versions of components, but they're still using components to basically create an abstraction of what you're using underneath. So you can compare this to HTML where you have to explicitly state everything, almost write everything from scratch. And it's a lot more work to do HTML because everything is explicitly stated. Components are good in the fact that we can abstract out what is being the explicitly stated elements. So another concept that we have to understand is rendering. So rendering is the process of showing each component, and every component must render something. Otherwise, your app breaks. So when a process has a new state or like version, it will re-render which just means that it will change the, it will automatically, it'll automatically reload that part of the page. So when you're performing your JavaScript, you're not changing the whole screen, but only parts of the screen. So you're only changing a component at a time. And for today's workshop, we'll be using functional components. So why functional components? We'll be getting to that, but basically functional components make it look nicer. This is missing parentheses right now, but what functional components do really well is they really compact your code so that it only focuses on key aspects. So rendering. So what you see in the return is what's being rendered. So we can move that button from our app to another component and still load it from app. And then we also will have to export our components so that other files can find it by using import. So we have to export the square and then import the square within the app. So why functional components versus class components? Most tutorials you find online have been talking about class components, mainly because that's how it was originally done. But functional components have slowly fallen into favor because of React's tools such as hooks, or mainly hooks, and class components have basically gone to the wayside because they don't have any further support. But class components look nice in the fact that they're more explicit on what each part of your life cycle is doing, but it's not as compact as the functional component. And so because class components can easily reach over like 200 lines, functional components can pretty much end up cutting it in half through the introduction of hooks and other ways of using information. So let's go ahead and add some more components in. So for today's app, I was going to just have just a numpad, a number pad, and also just like a display. So that's what we need. We'll still be using the square that we used earlier, but we'll be changing it a little bit so that we also have a number pad and a display. So first, we want to create a new file. And our first file will be called square. So so for every React component, you need to import React. And then we'll go ahead and export default, the square component. And we'll return. So your return is your render function, basically. If you were comparing it to a class component. So let's go ahead and just copy over everything here. And we can just paste it in here. Okay. So right now we're lacking a value, but we can pass value in through props. So props, we'll just look for value. So what this is doing is destructuring the props object so that I can get the value in there. All I need to do to call it is import square from square. And then once I have that, I can call square with the value of value. And voila, you can see that the square is on the right. So now that we have the square, we want to create our number pad. So in order to create our number pad, we want to use like multiple squares. So we're going to start with the same things. And we're going to return. I'm going to surround it with div because I want multiple elements. So what React doesn't let you do is return like multiple different elements without using something special. I will not go into it, but it should be like using fragments, which make it simpler, but we'll be using div for today's presentation. So I can add a bunch of squares in here. So here, square. So right now I can't find square, so I will just need to import square from square. And then once I have that, I can try changing this to the number pad. So now you can see we have two side-by-side squares. So let's go ahead and add another square with the value of 3. And so now I want to put 4, 5, 6 on a different column. So what I need to do is have this focus on, have one focus on columns and have another one that focuses on rows. So div. So let's go ahead and add a row in here. Okay, so now I have one that can focus on columns and focus on rows. So when you see it, now they're layered on top of each other. So let's go ahead and change this to 4, 5, and 6. And we can go ahead and paste another one in and paste the last one in. Okay. change this to 7, 8, and 9. And this one to 0. So as you can see here, let me just fix the CSS so that we can have everything aligned. Okay, so now we have our basic number pad look, which right now they all say hi, which isn't very helpful. But from our original app, we only have one inclusion, which is number pad. And let's go ahead and make a display component. So it broke because it couldn't find it. So we need to go ahead and add it. Okay, so display. And we want to export default function display. And let's go ahead and return a div. With the class name of display. Display, and then inside we have the value. So it can't find value, so we'll just go ahead and initialize it to 100. So let's go ahead and create our class display. And we're going to make the background color white. And then make the color black. Height will be 10 vmin, 30 vmin, and then we'll have a font size of 2.5. We'll put the text aligned to the right. And I'll just throw in some border radius. And then some margin at the bottom. And so that's basically our display. But we haven't learned how to make this number appear up here. And the reason behind that is because they're two separate components. So they won't have the same information. And so this is what brings us to understanding what state is. So we'll be learning about state management next. So state, basically if it changes, it'll re-render the component. It helps keep track of your useful information within a parent component. And this information should be propagated down to children. So in terms of parent components in our demo, the parent component would be the app, and the children component would be the display and the number pad. So we'll be using hooks today to really understand how to do state. So there's a hook called the use state hook, which lets you keep track of the current value and also a handler to set a new value to value. So that's basically what we'll be using today to use state. So some of the biggest questions within like React is, where should I use props and where should I use state? So props are more like our component arguments, and they're usually passed to your child components. Meanwhile, state is like a component local variable, and it's usually kept within the parent component. And so that's how you can maintain a hierarchy of information. So without further ado, let's go on and add some state to our demo. So now that we have our basic number pad and our basic display, we want to add some state to our parent component, which is app in this case. So let's go ahead and have our value and then our set value handler, and we'll be using the useState hook, and we'll just start it off with 0. It broke because it couldn't find it, so you have to import useState. That's how you end up using it. So our first goal is to pass the value to the display. So value equals to value. So now that our display has the value, it should be able to display it. So we'll just make this props, which is passed from the top, and then it can't find it because it's not destructured. So this is the same as props.value. So if I destructure props, it becomes just the value. Okay, so now we have the starting value of 0, which is correct. And now we want to pass our onChange to our number pad. So what we can do first is try sending over the handler to our number pad. So we're passing the function now, and we can go to number pad. And once we're here, we can look in the props for the click handler. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, click handler. And we could try adding it here. So in Square, we can now use the click handler to change it. So click handler, and I want to set the new value to the value. Right. So if I press 1, it'll work. And right now for 2, it doesn't work because it doesn't know what click handler is. So let's go ahead and add that to all of them. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it's not working in the way that we expect, where we want it to be 1. If I press 1 and then I press 2, it should be 12. So in theory, we would need to pass our value to our number pad. But what you can do first is add something else to it. So I'm going to create a new function here, which will be set new value. And we'll be using one of the arguments, so the value. We'll call this the number being added. And then we'll be using, so right now I'm just going to add some stuff so that some error checking. But basically we'll have set value be equal to value times 10 plus number. And we can directly pass this to each number. So we end up creating a completely different thing. So that ends up solving most of the state issues. By creating a separate handler, everything else makes it easier because you don't have to pass your value to your number pad in order to change it. So it solves a lot of different issues by just having it saved within the parent component and just being able to pass it down to your children component. So that solves that issue. And that's pretty much the end of our demo in terms of adding content to this React app. But we'll be talking about some other concepts, such as why immutability matters. So within the framework world, immutability has become the standard. And immutability is basically means that variables are not changed directly. So JavaScript does this very nicely in that it has ways to create new versions of objects and arrays easily and even copy over things. Most of their functions support like have a way, if you could do it mutably, have a way to be able to do them immutably. And this mainly through chaining, also like object.assign. I won't go into like some of the details of each of those objects or each of those APIs, but basically there's a very easy way to create what you want, but using just a function call, which will create a copy of it. And so why does immutability matter? Well, basically it makes it easier for React to detect if there's changes within your immutable objects. And so for your state, or I guess for your props, it knows that it should re-render at certain points. So compare that to having to compare to all your different objects and all of your different components. So if you have something at the top and it's being passed down to every single component, if there's a single change, then you have to compare within every single object that's being passed down. And so just by having something being immutable means it's easier to find it if it has changed. And in terms of extras on top of what I've talked today, we'll be talking about some advanced practices. So using React Router, this lets you basically map your pages together by creating components. So when you're using React Router, you'll be pointing to a component to load based off a certain URL. React hooks, we used one today for use state, but there's a lot more to it than just use state. There's some crucial ones like use effect, and then there's like use ref, use reducer. There's a lot of different hooks, and they're all powerful in their own sense. So I would recommend looking and trying to understand those, adding on a React component framework. So there's Material UI, React Bootstrap. There's plenty more out there. Usage of TypeScript. So how I used npx create React app. There's also a template for TypeScript versions of React, which are a little bit more complicated to get used to, in that you have to understand TypeScript before you can start it. And then understanding your packages, documentation, and then async practice for fetching routes. These are some of the advanced practices. Of course, there's a lot more in terms of trying to get your website to load faster, things like that. But these are some of the general topics in terms of how you can improve after this demo. Any questions?
We don't have any questions yet. Just as a reminder, everybody that's watching, we do have a Slido that's available. So if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to navigate over there. And I guess in the meantime, let me ask you a question, Leon.
Okay.
So how much like HTML and CSS background would you say that you would need to have to get started with React?
I would say you just need to understand just like basic elements in HTML. So like if you know what a div is, if you know what a span is, because those translate really easily to learning React. CSS knowledge is transferred to React because you're still using your CSS. So you so I wasn't very strong in CSS when I started React, but you kind of learn as you do it. So you just have to do like more React. So your CSS doesn't have to be strong, but you just have to know what you're looking for. So it just comes with time, comes with practice. Yeah. And then I guess another announcement is just that if you want to see the demo is posted on the UTSA ACM GitHub. Let me see if I can find it. So it's on here. The master branch is the initial project. However, there's the other branches, which has the basic JSX, and then adding components, and then adding state on top of it. So those are the three different branches that I kind of covered today in today's presentation.
Awesome. We do have a question on Slido. Are you going to be able to share this presentation on Slack?
I guess it's already on YouTube, but if you want the presentation itself, just feel free to message me. And then if you want the code, as I mentioned, it's on the repo. I can go ahead and give a link out to that after the meeting. And yeah, in terms of like those resources, I guess that's pretty much it.
Cool. And we're not getting any other questions, so I think you just explained everything too well, Leon.
Okay, cool. All right. So I guess we'll go ahead and end the meeting. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me on the Slack channel. Um, so just go to the direct messages and message Leon Yuan. I'll be there. I'll try to get to you as fast as possible. Um, so other than that, have a happy Monday and a exciting new week, I guess, even in quarantine. All right.
Thanks, Leon.
Thanks, everyone.